worried about censoring. There's a few songs we have which do have a few words in them, I've noticed this past week, but I don't think too many people notice it either.
Okay, Mr. Sachs, do you think that rating rock albums and possibly, putting stickers on them is an infringement on the First Amendment rights of the artists?
I don't think that who's doing the rating? You're talking about a government rating or some kind of a private
The government or groups such as the PMRC.
Or how about if the record industry was required themselves to put by federal requirement?
The rating itself, yeah, I think there's a First Amendment problem, but not a very serious one, so long as it's confined to rating. And the less overt role the government plays, the less the First Amendment problem. In other words, if there's a market force that insists on rating, that's not a First Amendment problem. If the record industry says, well, we're getting enough heat in order to, as a matter of business, we'll go along with the rating system, it's not much of a constitutional problem. If the government comes in and says you can't put out this record, that's a First Amendment problem. If the government comes and says you should rate it, it's a First Amendment problem, but it's less of a First Amendment problem. There's a lot of gray area. It's an easy question, but it's a hard one to answer.
Okay, I'd like to address this to Mr. Bunker. You said that a lot of parents are ignorant about what their children listen to. I was curious, do you think putting labels on will help them be more aware?
It'll only help the parent who's really concerned. I mean, that's not going to force any parent to all of a sudden, take an interest that he didn't have before. It just makes control and information easier. And I think those are the issues we're dealing with here. If you don't know what's in a particular product, then you have no control over that product possibly coming into the airwaves. Radio and TV are intrusive mediums, meaning that they can come into your home or come into your car without any control. Okay? And therefore, if they have access to a particular consumer, that being children or young people who have discretionary income, they can go and buy that. However, that parent did not have any control over what came in. Now they can turn off the knob for sure, but you can't monitor your kid 24 hours a day. Okay? So if a parent isn't interested in the first place, they probably won't respond to the ratings. But it will help the interested parent.
Just as a follow-up, do you know what percentage of parents are interested? Do you know how many people this will help?
I don't know how many, I don't have that kind of statistics, but I mean, they've proven that the average father, for example, speaks, in 1 week very little to his child. So I mean, we're dealing with a problem here that goes beyond rock ratings. We're dealing with a social problem of where business has developed a youth culture totally separate from the influence and control of the adult culture. And with upward mobility of a lot of families, middle-class income, car radios, and the advent of transistor radios, you have developed a youth culture that many parents are unaware of for the simple reason that the trends and the movement of it goes so rapid. And I don't really know how many parents are statistically, but with two families, two parents working, a lot of the problem comes from kids don't know their parents and parents don't know their kids.
This one's directed to Mr. Bunker. Now, are you actually in favor of putting labels on these records? Yes or no?
It would all depend on who was doing the rating system.
Okay, but if somebody responsible was doing it, you are in favor of rating the records, correct?
Possibly.
Okay, let's just make a hypothetical situation right here. Let's suppose that records are rated, and they're rated really fairly. Wouldn't these labels, which would go on the records, promote sales? After all, wouldn't a kid go out to the store and buy the worst rated record just to aggravate his parents? And if he did, wouldn't this defeat the entire purpose of the labels?
Yeah. Well, to answer your question is possibly. But that's not the issue.
Okay.
You know, the issue is not the personal, the issue is not a record company or anyone monitoring the personal morality of every consumer. The purpose of what we're talking about today, at least from how I see it, is monitoring and giving social responsibility to the record industry in terms of the control and information of the consumer who wishes to know. If you don't give a rip, you know, you can play Motley Crue and you can play whatever you want till your brain rots, you know, I mean. Well, hey, your brain could rot on Lawrence Welk too. I mean, I'm not here to say Motley Crue versus whatever. I'm just saying that you can't control necessarily what the consumer buys, but you can give information to the educated, the consumer who wishes to be educated.
Could I just clarify? Would you perceive some type of communication on a records, you know, such as a rating, just as a means of communication? So you really wouldn't have any problem with that? Not whether it would work or be effective, but you know, you would have no problem with information on a record that gives some indication of the content?
Once again, I would have to be, I think it could be useful if it was done fairly and equitably, and the artists and record companies and, you know, some kind of group of people who are concerned about the issue were all involved. I don't think it's fair to have some witch hunt mentality where someone who doesn't even understand the genre of rock and roll come in and, for instance, like Frank Zappa, who's very satirical, you know, you could get down on one song that had a totally opposite meaning than what it really had. So you have to have someone who's educated in the art form to make the judgments about the rating. But I think that we're, you know, to say that we don't want rating is to glorify the, you know, these inalienable rights somehow that the artists supposedly have.
Okay, so
All right, as far as the ratings go, I agree that if you put these little labels on the records that we're going to try to get the record with the most explicit lyrics, it's just that curiosity thing. And I know that when I was a teenager, we tried to sneak into the movies that we weren't supposed to go to and, you know, the fake ID, the whole bit. So I don't think that these labels are really going to help. But I think that if there is a problem, and when I tend to look at statistics, now I'm a news reporter, I've been in radio for 16 years, I've worked at every kind of radio station from talk radio like WGN to new wave music, and I've been in this a long time, okay? And my specialty now is news reporting, and I report every day on stories about child pornography, all right, constantly. The rise of child pornography, kids, adults, looking at children as sex victims, all right? Teenage pregnancy is up. We know that. 1 out of every 10 teens, 1 out of every 10 teens is going to be pregnant in this country. 2 out of 10 in Chicago. You know, that's an alarm. I think that's an alarming statistics, and those are the ones who give birth. Those aren't the ones who have abortions. The teen suicide rate has risen 300% in the last 10 years. Now, this is phenomenal. This is scary. I know my nephews know kids who have killed themselves. And I'm not saying that rock music is causing this, because, I mean, come on, we know that it's not responsible totally for it, but we know that, you know, if the lyrics in the songs are espousing that it's okay to screw around and, you know, let's just screw around with everybody we can, or it's okay to yell at our parents or yell at people who are in authority or be rebellious, if this is what the music is telling us that it's okay, and then we're seeing what is happening in society, we have to stop and we have to think, well, what is going on? And then we have to stop and think, well, what about the record industry? Most record companies, they know that sex records, the groups that sell sex on their records are the ones that are going to succeed, because they know that kids are interested in this. At the 2 rock and roll radio stations that I worked at, we were told that everything we put on the air, whether we said it between the records or a news story or whatever, had to deal with one of 3 things, and that was sex, drugs, or rock and roll, because our management knew that this is what would attract the kids. And, you know, we're all kind of interested in this, but if this is what's being constantly drummed at us as the 3 most important things in life, we're going to be in trouble when we get to be adults, because while those may be fun things, they're not the most important things in life. There are other things that are more important. So getting back to the ratings, You know, if we discuss it, if we say that the ratings are needed, if this is what we determine if we've got some problems in society, then I think if the ratings are going to be there, they've got to be stiffer, and you got to have an ID to get certain records, and, you know. Otherwise, ratings, because they're not going to work, the labels
Excuse me,
aren't.
don't hiss, okay? Don't hiss. If you're going to hiss, get out. I want you to listen to what they have to say, but listen with respect. Don't hiss. Josephine, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to sex in songs, it's not rock music. It's your Billy Ocean and your Jeffrey Osborne and Prince, which is a crossover artist. But it's mainly women like 25 to 40 buy that kind of music.
Okay, now, I'm not, you know, we know that that's one of the main topics. It's been for a long time, since The Wanderer, Wake Up Little Susie, like that. I'm not talking about love songs or romance or, you know, I'm talking about real explicit lyrics. There's really good love songs around. We all know them, and they mean a lot to us.
I
explicit.
can't remember any rock and roll songs that really have to do with sex.
How about Sugar Walls by Sheena Easton?
That is a middle of the road artist.
Well, I'm not talking, we're not talking about rock, easy listening, country, polka. We're talking about lyrics now. I can give a rip if the band, you know, had purple, green, yellow hair and wore, you know, nose rings.
But we're talking about
whatever, I don't care.
rock and sex right now, right?
We're talking about real explicit lyrics. We're not just talking about love songs and, you know, gentle innuendos or whatever. We're talking about explicit lyrics.
Well, how do you measure the effect that explicit lyrics would have on a young listener as opposed to, say, implicit lyrics? I mean, they've always been sexually implicit lyrics.
Well, I think
in
that,
love songs.
okay, now, majority of people here are in high school, right? But we all know that the younger kids, like 9 or 10, are now getting into some real heavy metal music with some real explicit lyrics. And, you know, I'm looking at them, I'm seeing that this is what they're being fed in their minds at 9 and 10 years old, sometimes 6 and 7. I think, what's going to happen to them when they get older?
I think, to answer your question, Mr. Wallace, generally when it comes to media analysis of the effect of a particular something on human consciousness, you know, whether it's TV, whether it's music, we're generally slow to get something like that done, because when you have economic lobbies that garner a lot of attention by their sheer size and their economic force when it comes to legislation, there's certain kinds of research that slides under the table. Nobody finds out about it. And it's like with video, you know, it's just like, well, let's put, for example, it's like smoking cigarettes. I mean, that whole thing's just been, you know, back and forth, because someone always finds, you know, someone who's done some research that says smoking is groovy, you know, go out and, you know, just, you know, Camels from, you know, 6 in the morning till 2 at night. It doesn't bother you, you know? And I think, so when it comes to the implicit, I think that a lot of the implicit stuff goes over kids' heads. And there's a lot more implicit stuff than most young people. Because you know, when I'm hanging around with kids and I say, do you know what this song means? A lot of times they're going, no, I didn't catch that. You know, they really didn't. But the stuff that's right up front, you know, like Wasp, Animal. Talking about, like, well, you got a barnyard or something?
Okay, well, that's just the point, though. I mean, chances are they know what that means before they hear it in the song.
Right. Yeah, really. But we're talking about parents now. We're not talking about kids. Kids know.
Parents usually know what it means, too.
You know, well, parents know, but they don't know until the kid gets home with the album and he's playing it and they go, excuse me, where'd you get this? You know, the kid says, this is my favorite album, you know.
But the parent knows that any child who's of high school age who doesn't have sex on the brain all the time isn't normal.
That's another issue we can go into later.
Let me ask, can I follow up here? Josephine, are there any guidelines that the record industry uses? You know, goes out through your stores? Any restrictions at all? Can my 8-year-old son come in and buy whatever he wants?
Anything he wants. Some stuff is stickered with explicit lyrics now. Some covers come out and for, like maybe the next pressing, they change the cover because they've had complaints about it. It's not really that bad. It's not like England. England is, you know, I think way overboard, but it could come down to being like
But
England.
the record stores would respond, the industry would respond to the marketplace, is what you're
You
saying.
have to.
If they're,
Yeah,
people are getting uptight about it, then
Right.
they would change.
yeah.
Paul, and on the, at WSEX, you said you play top 10. Whatever comes in the top 10
Right.
goes
So-
out. So that's it.
It's-
No,
it's-
no screening or no...
Well, no, I mean, if it's top 10, the majority of the people like it, otherwise it wouldn't get top 10. So it's accepted by the majority of the people. They'll find nothing wrong with it.
I'd like to get back to Ms. Levin. When you were talking about how you think music is a great influence in young people's lives, do you really think that music is that powerful? There's all kinds of outside influences everywhere you look. If you turn on the television, if you look at advertising in magazines, commercials, movies, there's references to sex and drugs and everything. Do you really feel that music affects children or kids that much?
Well, I agree with you about the outside influences because we know that, you know, the sex thing is everywhere, you know, television, everything that you say. But I think that what worries me about it is, you know, the younger kids, like the 7 or 8, 9, 10-year-old kids getting into the lyrics. And that's what worries me about them because I really think that they're too young at that age to be told everything about life. You know, they got to grow up, they got to experience childhood, and that's what worries me about it. And the other thing is, it gets me a little irritated if I know that the record industry is saying that the majority of the record companies are knowing that sex sells and that they're going to push it at me, and maybe that's not what I want to hear in the music, but that's what they're pushing because that's what they know the majority wants. So, you know, that gets me a little irritated.
Well, most 7 and 8-year-olds don't really buy albums, do you think? I mean,
But they're getting into it. I mean, you go to some of the concerts now, and you've got the 7 and 8-year-olds jumping up and down and really getting into it. Yeah, you do. I've seen it. And they're getting hold, and they think it's neat to get hold of their big brothers and sisters' records, or they hear them listening to them, and they, you know, they want to be like big brother or sister, so they want to listen too.
Okay, before when you were all going back and forth, Mr. Bunker brought up the song Sugar Walls. And Ms. Lenardi responded that that was middle of the road, or I don't remember what exactly she said, but that fits into an older demographic. And I think the issue is about what the children are listening to. Am I correct, or?
You know that if I took a poll here of people who heard the song Sugar Walls and know what it's about, you know, I would get a pretty high rating here. So we can talk about demographics and who buys records, but in terms of who listens to the radio, that's, you know, I mean, that's as much an issue as who purchases an album as well. I mean, to me, you know, I'm not exactly sure, you know, what the age breakdown is of the people who buy, you know, Sugar Walls, but I mean, I know WASP is, you know, that group would be a pretty young demographic. I'd say probably between the ages of about 12 and 18. The same with Judas Priest or, you know, Black Sabbath or something
Okay,
like that.
there are groups, you know, there are those groups and the like hardcore metal groups such as Celtic Frost and they used to be Hellhammer. And with their music, you can't really understand the lyrics, but it's it's printed in there. And Ms. Levin was saying a thing about how subconsciously we pick it up. And I'd like to ask you how we can pick it up if we can't even understand it.
If it's your favorite group, you learn the lyrics. You learn them. I've watched everybody in the first 20 rows, man, banging heads and singing the songs, man. They're not singing, you know, Hallmark card lyrics.
They're not banging their heads to the lyrics, they're, you know, doing it to the beat.
Pardon?
They're not banging their heads to the lyrics. They're, you know, they're going with
Well,
the
it's a
beat.
combination. I mean, you know, a live concert is more than just doing lyrics, and it's even more than just the lyrics. There's an ambiance about a group. I mean, there's just a vibe that a group gives, and kids will pick up on the vibe that they feel comfortable with, whether it's Black Flag or a real hardcore punk band or more of a Thompson Twins techno-pop thing, or whether it's a Motley Crue, type of thing. And by the way, it breaks down into classes you'll find. I mean, different classes, you'll find a blue-collar kid. A lot of kids who are into the heavy metal thing come from blue-collar backgrounds. And come Friday night, it's Miller time, So.
Josephine, is that a response? What are some of the break? You're in the business. What?
And I work in a store in Northbrook that is pretty well off, every area around there. And I sell more hardcore than almost any record store in the whole Chicago area, and metal. So I don't think it has anything to do with classes at all.
With what?
With class.
That's
With blue
because you haven't
collar
studied
or,
it.
Whatever.
All right, Miss Levin. Now, am I correct in assuming that your main problem with these lyrics is it affects 7, 8, and 9-year-olds?
Well, that is one of the problems, yeah. I mean, I don't, if you guys want to listen to it, it's okay. I don't like to listen to it, all right? I've got better things to do with my time. I'm concerned with other things right now than having somebody continually bombard me with these kind of lyrics. That's, when I listen to a song or music, I may want it to mean something more than that. Mean more than violence or just raunchy sex or drugs or something like that, because there's things that interest me a lot more right now. And I don't like it being bombarded by that when I turn on the radio.
Didn't you say that you were thinking about that yourself when you were younger?
Thinking about what?
Sex, drugs, getting into movies that you shouldn't have gotten into, things like that?
I'm not there right now. I can see now that I spent a few years on this earth that's not the most important thing in life.
So how old would you propose the restriction to be? How old should someone be before they hear that music?
I don't think that there's any way you're going to be able to set an age limit or prevent anybody from getting these records. I think that if the discussion goes far enough and statistics prove that there is a problem with it, and they decide to put the labels on, then they've got to do more than the labels. They've got to, ask for an ID. And I don't know, I suppose to say 17, that means that all the 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17s will get it. If you go a little bit lower than that, if you go 13, then you're going to have the younger kids get it. So let's say 17. Knowing then that everybody below, it's like the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. You put 55 and everybody goes 70.
So I gather from what you said earlier that you would prefer to see some sort of pressure put on the record companies to tone down lyrics. That would avoid any sort of rating system or any kind of restriction on people who might like to buy records. Do you sense any groundswell of public support that would apply such pressure?
I think realistically that people are more concerned now with the lyrics, with the content of music than they were a long time ago, because I think the lyrics have gotten a lot more explicit. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We know that they're more violent, they're more drug-oriented, more sexually oriented than they were 20 years ago or maybe even 10 years ago. So I think there is a concern among a lot of people that this is being, pushed at us through the music. So yeah, I think there's growing awareness of that.
I think if you read Billboard magazine, the trade magazines, there's a lot of people in the upper echelon of the record industry that are beginning to take a look at it, and not just because of economic pressures, but out of ethical and moral reasons, asking themselves. But a lot of the people in the record business, some of the transitions that have happened in the last 10 years, starting with probably somebody like David Bowie, who was into the glitter rock thing and the whole thing, and rock became more of theater. Now that rock is theater, a lot of the things that happen on stage, the artists, like for instance with the heavy metal thing and the whole occult thing and how many people are really into the whole devil worship, probably a large majority of those people are not into that. It's a theater thing. It's a thing. It's a sensationalism. And when there are hundreds of groups out there and you're trying to compete for the buyer, if you can go out, in pink panties, now this is a guy, if you can go out in pink panties with your hair bleached and, do something really outrageous on stage, then it could very well be that the person who responds to that kind of sensationalism is going to like you over someone else. And I think some of the record industry has stood back and kind of watched this and like going, yeah, it sells, but what do you think, Ed? I don't know, you know. And so in other words, it's been a social trend, and the record industry is just kind of, it controls part of it, but in some ways it's been a victim of just some trends in society. Kids are more ticked off in general. I mean, a lot of the punk groups that are very violent on stage, or at least have some violent things to say, that's where we have to be careful about rating systems, because some of them have some really good things to say. Some of the things that they're saying. And that's where, I guess, when it comes to the whole rating system, which is what we're talking about, whoever's going to be involved in that has to really be someone who understands the art form, understands satire, understands theater, and isn't just going to go like, oh, there's a dirty word there, because, I mean, we might rip stuff out of the Bible if it was just that. So we need to be educated.
Let me ask Mr. Sachs, are there any parallels to the print industry, regarding free speech issues here? Or are each individual, is each medium unique?
Well, there are some differences. The overall question, can somebody control what somebody else listens to or what somebody else reads? That's the same. There is a difference when you start talking about sound records, especially about radio, about television, because if you don't want to read a book, you don't go into the bookstore and buy it. What happens if you turn on the radio and there it is? It's a basic difference. Yes, you can turn to another station. Right. The number of stations is limited. So there is, traditionally, the laws that has to do with censorship has taken a somewhat stricter view towards censorship of print materials. Censorship of print material is much less likely to be approved than some kind of an intrusion into broadcasting, where there's less of a choice on the part of the consumer as to whether they take it or not. That's the chief difference.
Right now, it's 5 minutes before the bell rings, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, so you're welcome to talk for a while, loosen up a little bit, and I think our video technicians want to make some adjustments as well. So we'll take a short break for a few minutes. Don't leave the room, though. Wait for the bell, and Mr. Felgenauer and the TV crew have some adjustments to make as well. So we'll just take a short break. Let's wait another minute so we get finished with all those beepers.
Is she like basically, what music does she listen to?
Great, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question. I believe Eric.
Yeah. Okay, after I ask the question, I'd like the entire panel to answer, going from Mr. Pash to Mr. Bunker. This is a real easy question.
Good.
Should anything be sold to anyone on the record market? I'm talking about lyrics. Should anything be sold to anybody? Or should we take Ms. Levin's suggestion where only people 17 and above should show ID and then they're able to buy certain records?
No, I don't think there should be an age limit on a record. I mean, if the parents don't want it in the home, the kid buys it, he'll get punished, to each family his own. But where the parents think their kids should be allowed, I was allowed to get anything I wanted. Now, why should I suffer? My parents think it's okay for me to buy it. I don't think there should be an age limit on movies or records. They listen to it on the radio anyway.
Ms. Leonardi?
No, I don't think so either.
And why?
Basically the same
Move
reason.
up to the mic.
My
Just a little
parents, I think I turned out okay, and I've been listening to heavy metal for, heavy metal and everything.
So in other words, because you're listening to heavy metal, your subconscious mind isn't going to make you a drug addict or anything?
No, it's
This is true. This is true. I've been listening to rock and roll music, since I've been 7 and 10, all through high school, and I would sometimes buy the records because of the words, too, because, it's funny. You showed your friend, hey, check out what they're singing about here, Look at me, I don't go out killing people. I don't, steal things.
As you continue down the panel, are we talking about anything goes here? Is that what we're saying here? Your question was that anything goes?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Sachs?
I'm inclined to pretty much let people go in with and purchase what's available. Mostly because I think the development of responsibility actually has to come from inside, not from outside. And if you impose it from the outside, you're in danger that it never develops. And that strikes me as being, in a different way, probably at least as serious a social problem in the long run as the other.
Okay. Ms. Levine?
Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. You know, it's a really hard question because, you know, like what you're saying, I think is to a great extent true, but it still worries me. It really does when I think about, you know, little kids hearing these records. It really does worry me because I think, you know, they're little kids. They've got to be protected. And then you think of...
Wait, time out.
Okay, but you know what? I mean, let's look at it. I mean, how many parents are really taking the kind of responsibility that we say that they automatically take? They don't do it.
Parents don't
Sometimes
tell you
they
about...
do, but a lot of times...
Wait a minute, we will have a chance to ask questions the last 20 minutes of the program, 15 minutes or so, and you'll line up over there, and you'll stand up, and you'll be heard. So please wait. Let's get through the discussion. Thank you.
You know, whenever there's a law imposed in society, it's because people have failed to take the responsibility for themselves, and that's why laws are made, okay? Because people will race down the streets too fast and they'll hit kids or whatever. You know, that's so a speed limit is imposed, or something else. And this is why, you know, I'm just saying this is why laws are made, because people have failed to take responsibility. Now, I don't think that all parents are really as responsible as they should be. You know, I think if you look at the crime statistics in our country and you look at different things that I report on every day, and you see what's happening in our society, it worries me. I think, well, you know, maybe people, and I think most people are, but there's a big segment, a growing segment of people who are not becoming responsible adults. And that's what worries me.
So you'd be in favor of some restrictions, whatever they be?
You know, it's hard for me to say what they should be, okay, because I don't know. I think it might have to be a trial and error method to see what works. But again, I just don't think that little kids should be able to listen to this stuff, or kids who haven't really, you know, got a good grasp on life yet and realize what's going on. I mean, it worries me.
When you mean little kids, do you mean the little 7th graders who are in 2nd grade? Or are you talking about high school, because the students our age?
When I'm talking about little kids, I'm talking about, you know, 6 through 10.
They don't work, they don't have any money to buy records.
No, but they listen. Okay, but they listen to it, Big Brother and Sister. You know that. I mean, they do.
Do they understand?
They don't understand what the lyrics are saying. I mean, sugar walls, they're going to get this picture of walls with sugar on them. The kids don't know that.
I don't think you're right there. I think you're a lot smarter than you think.
I didn't know what sugar walls meant until my friend goes, you know what that means, don't you? And I'm like, oh yeah. You know, I had to think about it for a while.
How old are you?
I'm 22.
Okay, well, you're the exception then.
No, I'm not. I asked people that called up from the past week. I go, where's your on 101
I think I understand. You didn't understand what sugar walls meant when you listened to it and you're 22?
No.
He doesn't sit there.
I didn't sit there and listen to it. I listened to a song because I like the music. And I asked that for the past week when people called up. I go, if there's a new Madonna song out and you hear it and they announce it's new and you go out and buy it, could you tell me what that song was trying to tell you? And they go, no. I mean, they like it because of the music, the beat, the melody.
Mm-hmm. Which I know. I mean, I can understand it
Me too. I'd have to listen to a song. I'd probably listen to it 4 years later. Maybe one day I'd listen to it and then go, oh wow, I never knew what that meant before.
And I know I've had the exact same experience as you, because I mean, that's I think how we all do. We don't listen to the words, but maybe we should. Maybe we should know what we're listening to.
I know Mr. Bunker is next, but as long as we're right here on a roll, Mr. Sachs, is freedom of speech and expression unrestricted?
The way the Supreme Court cases has developed.
Can you hear that? Slide the mic up a little bit there.
Is that better?
Yeah. Okay. Is free speech unrestricted?
Free speech doesn't, the law is free speech does not apply to obscenity, according to the Supreme Court. Now, what that means, nobody knows. After years and years and years of litigation, at one time, they had cases that said the protections of free speech don't apply to obscenity because obscenity is utterly without social value. Then the court came back and said, if you know it's obscene if it's utterly without social value. And then they came back again a few years later and said, no, we didn't mean that. We meant what we said the first time. If it's obscene, it has no value. But it doesn't have to have no value in order to be obscene. You got that? So, the best thing that anybody ever said about it was Justice Stewart, who died a number of years ago, when they asked him about obscenity, and he said, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. Which, for a legal definition, is pretty helpless. The law is, the free speech does not protect obscenity, but what is obscenity is, always has been, and probably always will be up in the air.
Okay. And then, Mr. Bunker, your views, anything goes?
No, nothing can go on. I as someone who taught school for 7 years, I just can't believe that, we can throw out the fact that moral learning comes in increments. I don't give a 6-year-old kid a gun. And the reason I don't give a kid a gun because he doesn't understand the ramifications of the power behind that gun. I don't show films of explicit sexual acts to an 8-year-old little girl because her sexuality hasn't been developed at this point for her to understand, exactly what's happening. Now, whether they understand explicitly what's happening is one issue. Whether they understand implicitly, obviously, happens as the older they get. I have a problem, though, with what the young man said. I'm surprised he said it if he's on the debate team, with the implication that, because it took the whole issue into more of a volatile, emotional issue like that. Somehow we're saying that if there are controls on records, that if people listen to rock music, their teeth's going to fall out, and they're going to get acne, and they're going to go out on drugs. I don't think anybody on this panel is saying that. I surely am not. And so I don't want that implied that somehow that restraints and that kind of reactionism is what we're talking about here today. We're talking about balance. We're talking about a golden mean. By golden mean, where we're taking extremes and somehow coming together with something that's fair and equitable. We're talking about social responsibility. We're talking about capitalists and the economic issues of profit being not necessarily being the main reason why we put something out, but dealing with where a particular community feels, what a community feels. And if we're going to ask the youth community, who has been brought up in a society that has been told that free speech means saying whatever you want, which I believe is a misappropriation of what free speech really means, then if we took that over into, say, for instance, the press, I mean, it would be chaos. You would know that. I mean, we would have people saying anything that they wanted on the front page of the newspaper, and someone has to make an editorial decision as to what goes into that newspaper.
Okay, then what are the harms of rock and roll? As maybe stated, why should we ban, or not ban, but why should we put like maybe warning labels on this? What's the harm of rock and roll going to be doing to our generation?
Could you, I'm not sure.
And can I clarify?
Yes.
Is, if their hair's not going to fall out, as mine, or their teeth aren't going to, and their teeth aren't going to rot.
Music you listen to it.
All those, if the impression shouldn't be that you believe that all these terrible things are going to happen, every single person that listens to rock music will turn to drugs, if those things won't necessarily happen, what then is the major underlying concern?
I think the underlying concern is somehow having information and control over what comes into the lives of our children. We're talking about parental, I think we're talking about a parental issue here, where parents need to be informed. Now, if they choose not to be informed, then no rating system will help them. But if there isn't a rating system, then they won't know even if they want to. And when it comes to films, I find it a bit strange that somehow we're freaked out, like, oh wow, if we do this rock rating thing, I mean, like all of our artists will be singing, Life is Groovy, wow, I mean nothing, lyrics, they're just silly. and somehow there won't be any guts to them. And we're not talking about artists that have integrity here. We're not talking about art that says something about humanity, that raises the consciousness of people, that puts input into a community. I mean, we're not talking about that. But, we do it with films, and, granted, in a lot of ways, kids still go in some ways. But it is a monitor for someone who has a 12-year-old kid who they feel, I don't want this kid to be hearing about a 13-year-old boy. Need know. Okay, so granted, some of the implicit stuff of some of the more immoral artists goes over their heads, but nonetheless, there is an influence there. And I find it strange when we get, we say, hey, we need to take the sexist language and the racist language out of our literature. We need to be very sensitive to what we give our kids in high schools. But when it comes to sexuality, we all of a sudden go, hey, do your thing. It's your thing. And I mean, once you hit the point where, you're feeling your sexual vibe, play it. And I think as a society, if we do that, if we look historically at what's happened to societies that have allowed permissive sexuality to run rampant. Now, we're not talking about here where, everybody's walking around and Jerry Falwell is the, purveyor of what happens, and I don't want that to happen. But if we don't use some restraint, then what's going to happen is I think that the result of that is going to be a very distorted understanding of what sexuality is. The advent of the pill, by the way, has changed the face of rock and roll, because once the pill came along, you'll find that sexuality now can be expressed outside the context of marriage. If you study the history of rock and roll, you'll find that prior to that time, the black community maybe had talked about raw sexuality. But now with the advent of the pill, now kids seeing this, there are probably a lot of sexually active kids here in this audience, and they can separate their sexuality from their marriage. They don't have to, they can have sex, they don't have to worry about being married. That was not an option for their parents, by and large. I'm not saying that some people didn't use the rhythm method, but by and large they had to be quite careful. So what happens, of course, is that for these kids, sexuality is not that big of an issue in the sense of destroying them. But it was in previous generations, and I think we have to look at broader cultural happenings here, not just the rock issue.
Well, excuse me, Dave, how do you propose achieving this golden mean you were talking about? You earlier said you were ambivalent about ratings, or you questioned their effectiveness.
I didn't say that. That was a misunderstanding.
I'm sorry. Well, how do you propose achieving this golden mean you were talking about?
I think that there are four issues there are four groups of people that have to be involved here. I would say that one of the biggest groups has to be the record companies, and I say that as someone who works for a record company. Because, Twisted Sister would have never got airplay, well, it doesn't get much airplay, but Twisted Sister would have never had the opportunity to sell what they sell had not a record company picked them up as an act. Some A&R guy, artist and repertoire, had to sign them, had to go to a club, check them out, watch them, and in his mind he had to say, this is going to sell. So the industry. The second group I think is important is the artist. The artist has to be someone. There has to be some integrity. I don't want anybody telling me that I can't talk about sex on my album, but I'll tell you one thing. I mean, what I do with my wife, or what I do with my morality is my own personal issue. However, I don't want some dirty old man talking to my 13-year-old daughter about strange things. Okay, so I want some control of it. So the artist has to have some integrity. The other is the consumer. Now I would put along, by the way, with the industry, with the retailer, because the retailer has to be sensitive to her community. If her community likes a certain thing and they feel comfortable with it, then that's the influence that she has. But those would be the groups that I think should be involved in that. That's going to be difficult, but I think these kind of issues are difficult because what we're dealing with here is moral reasoning, and a lot of us have a lot of different attitudes as to what is moral law. Some people, feel that there aren't moral absolutes, and that we get what we learn from our society. I don't personally believe that, but some people do. So if society becomes moves this way, then law moves that way. But if 51% of the people in our society said something was okay, would that make it right?
While the discussion continues,
if anyone wants to ask a question, just quietly get up and stand over there behind the microphone, very quietly. Oh, wow. A lot of questions.
All right, we'll get to those as quickly as possible then. And we'll continue if we have another question here. Sure. Frank?
Ms. Levin, now you've shown that you're not in favor of, or that you are in favor of labeling these records because young people do not have sufficient morality.
I'm in favor of some kind of control, whereas, you know, it would hopefully prevent some of these kids, that it wouldn't be just a carte blanche thing where they can just get hold of anything they want. Now, I don't know what's going to work. I don't know what's going to work. I think it's going to have to be trial and error.
Don't you think you're imposing your morality on the rest of us by doing this? Because what you think is immoral, other people may think is quite fine.
You know, it's a difficult question because I know that everybody does have their own morals. I realize that. But I think that as adults, I think we realize that there are some things that are not reasonable. And those are the things that when we get to the real raunchy, explicit things, when we talk about murder or undue violence, I think that in a society we realize that those things are just not acceptable by society. And that's the thing I want to guard against. You know, that's the thing I think that as responsible people we should try to guard against. So I'm not, trying to be super prudish or anything like that. I'm just saying that, there's got to be some restraint and there's got to be a balance. I think we all realize, what's right to a certain extent, and there's some gray areas to everything, but I think we realize what's, really wrong or really right. And those areas that are really wrong that we could come to agreement on, I think we got to watch out for.
Any follow-up here? Is the imposition of morality, is that something, this is to the panel in general, is that something that's unique? When we pass laws, don't we, in a sense, impose?
All laws do legislate morality. I mean, that's what laws do,
Question?
I'd like to ask this question to Mr. Sachs. Earlier, Ms. Levin stated that there's a growing number of irresponsible adults, and which could partially be attributed to rock music. And I'd like to ask you, if in all your years of law you have ever seen or presented a case where someone has been so moved by listening to rock and roll that they've turned to deviance or crime.
All right, I didn't say that the growing number of irresponsible adults could partially be attributed to rock music. I said what I wonder about is if, because that's, that's not, I don't think that's true, but what I wonder about is if the kids are bombarded with real explicit lyrics at a real young age, how responsible are they going to be? And it's true that we do have, as they get up to be adults, and it is true, though, that we do have a growing number of irresponsible adults, because if you just looked at the crime statistics and child abuse and things like that, okay? I don't know if this is the reason. I don't know.
Have you ever seen it, Mr. Sachs?
I've never had anybody who claimed to have been moved to crime by rock music. I think there was somebody in Florida who attempted to defend a murder charge on something like that, and the man who shot the mayor of San Francisco claimed that he was driven to crime by eating too many potato chips. Don't laugh, the jury bought it. They really did. But no, I know what you're asking. There was an article in this morning's New York Times, a federally appointed commission, the chairman of which was Attorney General Meese, has just come down with a lengthy report that says that pornography does have some effect and ultimately an antisocial conduct. This is in contradiction of a similar report by a presidential commission in 1970 that said, no, it doesn't make any difference. And although they've tried to explain the differences, I think what actually happens is depends on who's on the commission. It's almost an impossible question to answer. There have been some very serious studies that have come down in different directions. It's a question of how much do the arts or something like that affect people's conduct. Was Hitler moved by Wagner's music? I don't know. To a certain extent, maybe. But your question is, there's no definite answer to it. I've never had anybody who said such a thing to me.
We'll move to the, can we move to the, one more question?
Yeah, Mr. Sachs, recently a case came up, I'm not sure where in the United States, but a boy committed suicide, and he was totally obsessed with Ozzy Osbourne's music. And his father came into his room. He would sit in his room all day.
Sorry, his father said,
We'll listen to Ozzy Osbourne's music. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but he committed suicide, and his father came in the room and found him laying on the bed with his headphones on and with the gun in his hand. And a song on the album was Suicide Solution. Is this right that the father is now suing the record company and the artist?
Does he have a case? Is it?
Yeah, can this be done?
I wouldn't take his case on a contingent fee, but
You lawyers,
you never know, because it's going to be handed over to a jury, which is going to be a cross section of his community probably, and they're going to have to make a. You never know what's cause and what's effect there. A lot of people that age. My recollection is that people in their high school years don't really understand the meaning of getting over something. Not the way you do when you've been knocked around for another 20 years and you realize that you survived things. People your age are more inclined to suicide about what an older person would consider unimportant things. And whether the song encouraged him or whether he listened to the song because he was going to do it anyway or some combination of the two, nobody knows.
I agree with you. I don't know if we could say that song was responsible for that boy committing suicide. I did an interview recently with a man who, this is his specialty, as a psychologist, and he talks to teenagers all day. I mean, that's what he does, constantly. And he said that the main reason that teenagers are committing suicide is because they feel that there's no hope, that, there's no reason to go on. They've got problems that they feel are very serious, and they just don't have any hope for their future. And I just, I'm thinking if music, if one of the things that as teenagers we really like is music, it's too bad that music can't provide more hope to the kids. I just wish it could, rather than beating them down or stuff like that.
Thank you. Let's move to the questions from our student body. The voice of the people.
I am not a student body,
Okay.
but I have a question.
Could you identify yourself, then?
My name is Lisa Stagg, and I would like to ask Ms. Levin, what is the format of Wcfo radio?
We're a contemporary Christian rock and roll radio
Right,
station.
and Mr. Bunker, what kind of music do you retail it?
Do you mean, I'm not sure what you mean.
You strictly, it's more Christian-type music, easy
We
listening,
have rock groups, we have punk
contemporary.
rock groups, we have new wave groups, we have heavy metal groups.
Okay.
So in other words, you're using a term that I don't particularly want to apply to my music in the context that it could stereotype. So I mean, we have bands that sound like the Thompson Twins, we have bands that sound like Judas Priest.
Okay, fine. You're up here saying that I've grown up with music all my life. I have not had any adverse effect on my life or my sister's life or my son's life. I have a 4-year-old son who listens to music. By telling a retailer that they are now responsible for the responsibility of these kids out here on how they're going to listen to music, that is putting more responsibility on us and on people in the radio business who then...
Forgive me for the Ted Koppel format here, but could you get to the question? I want everyone who gets up there to ask a question. Thank you.
All right, fine. How is censoring music going to be any different or make a difference in society other than censoring TV or a newspaper or anything that these kids do, taking a drive along the street? Why does it have to be just music? Why?
Well, I think the TV already has a lot of censorship on it. They don't just put
You have
everything on there.
150 channels you can choose from HBO to the Playboy
That's a
channel.
different issue, because cable you buy.
It's still...
Doesn't matter, they can still watch it.
I don't buy WSEX.
You go to
I don't
the
pay for
record
that.
store and buy an album.
You don't have to listen to it either, though.
You go...
I know, but that's my point, I know. I agree with you. You know, the audience missed the point. But I'm trying to differentiate between cable and, you know, it's a different situation. But go on. I watch it among myself. Let's let the lady ask her question.
Well, you say you buy cable. You buy albums. You more or less buy a radio station, what you listen to by
I guess
the
the
radio.
question is, what's the difference? And the difference is...
Well, there is censorship in TV and there's censorship in newspapers. Newspapers can't just print everything. There's very stringent libel and slanderous laws. I mean, there's censorship in all these things. There already is. There are certain things that are considered acceptable in those forms, and now